most dangerous man is the one who doesn't need to prove it anymore. What begins as a routine security check turns into something no one saw coming, especially not the young officer who thought he was in control. Let us know in the comments section below where you're watching from, and stay tuned as this powerful story unfolds. Jake Mitchell had only been on the force for 6 months, but he carried himself like he'd been wearing the badge for years. At least, that's what he told himself every morning when he adjusted the tight collar of his uniform and checked his reflection twice before walking out the door. 24 years old, buzz cut tight, boots polished to a mirror shine, and an eagerness that made his sergeant sigh out loud. Jake wasn't a bad cop. He was just trying too hard to be one. He pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Jefferson Municipal Building, nodding to the receptionist, who barely glanced up. Early shift. The building wasn't open to the public yet, which meant only janitorial staff, night crews, and a couple of sleepy clerks were shuffling papers in the basement. Jake's job this morning was simple, routine building check. Nothing major, just keep an eye out. And show presence. That last part wasn't official, but Jake took it to heart. He wanted to be seen, to be respected, maybe even feared a little, not in the wrong way, but enough that people didn't forget he was the law around here. He wanted the weight of the badge to land when he walked into a room. So when he saw the old janitor pushing a mop bucket near the city records office, he adjusted his belt and walked over, shoulders squared. The janitor didn't look up at first. He was a broad-shouldered man in a faded Navy work uniform. His back was slightly hunched, not from weakness but from years of labor, bones shaped by habit. Silver-gray hair cropped short, broom held lightly, but with the kind of grip that said he'd never dropped anything without meaning to. He moved methodically, quietly, like a ghost. Jake cleared his throat. "Hey, excuse me, sir. Need to see your ID." The mop paused. The man turned slowly. His face was lined but calm, with eyes the color of storm clouds. Quiet, unreadable, and ancient in a way Jake couldn't place. There was no fear in them, no confusion, no apology, just stillness. "Excuse me," the man said, voice rough, like it had once been smooth but worn down by time and dust. Jake felt the weight of the silence. He straightened. "Standard security check. You're in a restricted wing of the building before hours. Just need your name and ID, sir?" The janitor nodded once, slowly. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. He set the mop against the wall, reached into the front pocket of his work shirt, and pulled out a laminated badge with a photo, name, and ID number. Raymond Smith, Custodial Services. Jake held it longer than necessary. "Raymond Smith." He sounded it out like he was chewing something tough. "You work here long?" Ray met his eyes. "Long enough." Jake didn't like that answer. Too vague, too calm. "You always come through this hallway?" Jake asked, a little sharper. "Very morning. Just after the night shift ends. They leave the floors dirty." "You have a key?" Ray didn't answer right away. He just motioned toward the utility ring clipped to his belt. It jingled softly. 20 keys, minimum. Jake frowned. "That's a lot of access for a janitor." Something flickered in Ray's eyes. Not anger, not annoyance. Something quieter, deeper, like watching waves break against a seawall that had stood for decades. "You ever wonder how buildings stay clean while the rest of the world sleeps?" Ray asked. Jake didn't answer. He didn't like being questioned. Behind them, the hallway buzzed faintly with overhead lights. Down the corridor, a woman from records passed, barely nodding at Ray as she walked by. "Everything all right here, officer?" she asked without slowing down. "Just a routine check," Jake replied. "Have a good morning." He turned back to Ray. Still there, still calm. Jake didn't like it. Something in the man's demeanor made him feel like he was the one being checked, watched, measured. And it wasn't a good feeling. "You served?" Jake asked, almost instinctively. He didn't know why he asked it. Ray did. Jake waited. Nothing more came. Fudge. Ray reached into his back pocket, slowly, carefully, and handed over a second ID card. Not work issued. This one was old, military, faded but intact. U.S. Army. A photo from years ago, clean-shaven. A name, SFC Raymond Smith. The letters stamped across the top, retired. Jake stared. Special Forces, he asked quietly. Ray nodded once. Jake blinked, suddenly unsure of his footing. When? Ray's voice lowered, not in volume but in tone, like the room tilted with it. Desert Storm, OIF, OEF. Took early retirement after 30 years. Jake tried to play it cool. What did you do? A pause. Whatever was needed, Ray said. That shut Jake up. He handed the card back with both hands. Something in him shifted. All the bravado, the steel-jawed posture, the thin, pool-like, self-imposed calm, it cracked under the weight of quiet respect. I didn't know, Jake said, voice low. You weren't supposed to, Ray replied. That was the job. And then, with no ceremony, Jake did something no one expected, not even himself. He stood straight, brought his hand to his brow and saluted. Ray didn't smile, didn't nod. He just held Jake's gaze for a beat, then turned back to his mop, as if the moment had passed. As if it never happened. But Jake stood there, frozen, trying to stitch together what he'd just seen and what he hadn't. Because something told him this was only the surface, and Ray Smith wasn't just a janitor, not even close. And the deeper Jake looked, the more the story began to change. And the questions started to whisper louder. Who exactly was Raymond Smith, before the world forgot his name? Jake didn't talk much during the rest of his rounds that morning. He passed through the municipal building like a man floating behind his own eyes. His partner, Officer Boone, joined him at the front entrance just after 9, coffee in hand, wearing the same disinterested expression he always wore during the first hour of duty. Boone had been on the force for over 20 years, the kind of cop who spoke in short grunts and whose greatest gift was noticing everything without ever seeming to look. You good? Boone asked, raising an eyebrow as they walked side by side. Jake nodded, but too quickly. Yeah, just ran into someone earlier, one of the janitors. Boone took a sip of his coffee. Old guy? Kinda built like a brick wall? That's him. Boone chuckled. Ray, good man. Keeps to himself. Jake slowed slightly. You know him? Everyone around here knows him. Been cleaning these halls longer than I've been wearing a badge. Never talks much. Doesn't cause trouble. Always early. Always gone before lunch. Jake hesitated before speaking. Did you know he was Special Forces? Boone's pace didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Yeah. Heard whispers. Army. Long time back. But no one knows much more than that. He didn't talk about it, and no one presses. Jake frowned. You ever think it's weird? A guy like that? Mopping floors? Boone stopped walking, turned to face Jake. You're young. You think people carry their story on their sleeve. Most of the real ones? They bury it so deep even they forget where they put it. Jake didn't answer. He was still thinking about the way Ray had stood. Calm, unflinching, like he'd seen 1,000 kids just like Jake in 1,000 different uniforms, barking orders with no clue what the real world could do to a man. They went back to patrolling, but Jake couldn't shake the encounter. There was something about the way Ray had said whatever was needed. Like the words themselves had weight. Like the air shifted when he spoke. That night Jake found himself scrolling through his phone, lying on the edge of his bed in his one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't regulation behavior, but he couldn't help it. He dug, Googled, searched military records, found a few vague mentions of a Sergeant First Class Raymond Smith involved in a Black Ops unit, but everything else was redacted, Black bars over text like the truth had been erased, no photos, no interviews, just blank spaces where a story used to be. The next morning, Jake arrived earlier than needed. Ray was already there, just as Boone said, same hallway, same mop, same rhythm. Jake didn't say anything at first. He stood at the end of the hall and watched him work, like trying to catch a glimpse of something not meant to be seen. Ray didn't look up. He didn't have to. "You're back," Ray said after a moment, as if it was a matter of fact rather than surprise. Jake stepped closer. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday." Ray paused, then turned, arms relaxed at his sides. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I was trying to prove something," Jake said. "To you, to myself, I don't know." Ray looked at him, studied him for a moment. Then he said something Jake wasn't ready for. "I remember when I was you." Jake blinked. "You do?" Eager, looking for lines to draw, wanting to be seen, wanting to mean something, Ray turned back to the bucket, pushed it down the hall. "Then one day you find out the world doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you do when it counts." There was a beat of silence. The mop glided over the tile like it had its own memory. "Did it count, what you did?" Jake asked, unsure if he had the right. Ray didn't answer right away. Sometimes I think it did. Other times I think it was just dust in a different room." Jake leaned against the wall, folded his arms. "I looked you up." Ray didn't react. "Couldn't find much. Some documents all blacked out. Like the world erased you on purpose." Ray nodded. "That's what it feels like, sometimes." "Why'd you stop?" Jake asked. Ray exhaled through his nose. "It wasn't the killing. It was the disappearing." Jake looked confused. Ray continued. "People think war breaks you, that it tears something out of you, but sometimes it just makes you vanish. You come home, and everything looks the same, but nothing feels the same. Your body's here, but your mind's still back there, looking for exits, watching rooftops, counting steps." Jake's throat tightened. Ray turned and looked directly at him. "I came back, and there was no parade. No uniform, just a broom." "That was the trait." Jake swallowed. "Is that why you clean floors?" Ray half smiled. "It's quiet work. Simple. Honest. I mop, the floor gets clean, cause and effect, no politics, no gray zones." Jake nodded, not fully understanding but beginning to. "I don't want to be like the others," he said after a moment. "The ones who forget men like you, who talk about honor like it's a slogan." Ray's expression didn't change. "Then don't. But don't expect it to be easy." At that moment, the hallway light buzzed overhead and flickered once. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Ray's eyes darted upward instantly. His shoulders shifted. Just for a moment. Jake caught it. "You saw that?" Ray's mouth thinned. "Old habit, always watch the lights. Sometimes that's the first thing that tells you a room's about to change." Jake looked up, watching the flicker himself. "That happen a lot, the room changing?" Ray's eyes stayed on the light. "More than you know." The next few days, Jake changed. He started showing up earlier. Sometimes he helped Ray push the mop bucket. They didn't talk much, just walked the halls in silence. Occasionally Ray would share a story, never with dates or places, just moments. "You ever been in a room with 5 people and know 3 of them are going to die before lunch?" he once said. Jake had just nodded, quietly. Ray wasn't teaching him how to be a soldier. He was teaching him how to see. One morning, Boone found the 2 of them sitting on a bench near the boiler room. Ray sipping cheap black coffee from a thermos. Jake listening. Boone shook his head. "Kid's getting himself an education." Ray smirked. "Not the kind they give in academies." Boone tipped his cap. "That's the only kind worth having." As the days passed, Jake started to notice things. Cracks in the building layout, faulty security locks, A camera in the West Wing that blinked when it shouldn't. He brought it up to Ray. Rachel nodded. Now you're seeing shadows. Jake tilted his head. What do you mean? Ray looked at him long and hard. The shadows we keep, he said. They're not just behind us. Sometimes we walk beside them. Jake never forgot that, because somewhere deep inside he knew this wasn't just a janitor with a mysterious past. This was a man who had seen, and Jake was just beginning to learn what that meant. Ray's rhythm never changed, but Jake could feel the tension building behind the man's silence. It wasn't in his words. Those remained sparse and measured, always carrying more weight than the sentence required. No, it was in the little things. The way Ray paused before entering certain rooms, the way he never let his back face an open doorway, the way he'd look at someone just a second too long when they passed in the hallway, like he was scanning for something the rest of the world missed. Jake started noticing it more after the third week of quietly walking morning rounds beside him. There were little things happening in the building, things that on their own didn't scream much, but together, they scratched at something. Twice, Ray had asked Jake casually, "Did you hear that?" when there was nothing but the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. A door that was supposed to remain locked had been left slightly ajar one morning. Records room, third floor, top right wing. When Jake checked the logs, the system showed no access after hours, no triggered alarm. The janitorial cart Ray used had a small strip of duct tape over one wheel. One morning, Ray stared at it for 10 seconds longer than necessary. "It was moved," Ray murmured. "You know, the angle's wrong." Jake didn't press, but it stuck with him. He started pulling extra patrols, even though he wasn't asked. He logged in late at night and checked internal camera feeds. Once, he saw a figure on the second-floor stairwell at 3:07 a.m. The timestamp existed, but the footage flickered and cut out as soon as the figure turned toward the camera. 3 seconds gone. Then back. Jake sent a copy of the footage to his phone. He didn't tell Boone. He didn't tell dispatch. He told Ray. Ray watched the clip in silence, phone cradled in his hands like he was holding something fragile. He replayed the 3-second blackout again and again, eyes narrowing. "This wasn't a glitch," he said at last. Jake's mouth felt dry. "You think someone's in the system?" Ray didn't respond. He simply set the phone down, folded his arms, and stared across the empty hallway like he was listening to a sound Jake couldn't hear. Later that day, Ray took him to the basement, far beneath the public access floors, down to a level Jake didn't even know the elevator reached. It required a key turn and a manual override on the panel, which Ray performed without a word. The door opened to a long, dim corridor with rusted piping and half-dead bulbs. Everything down here smelled of old air and soldered steel. "What is this place?" Jake asked, adjusting his flashlight. "Old infrastructure. Most people forget it exists," Ray replied. "But they used to store sensitive materials here before digital records." As they walked deeper, the air grew colder. Ray moved with purpose. He stopped at a metal door marked Utility Storage 3F, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out a small, unmarked key. "Someone's been here," he muttered. "How can you tell?" Ray pointed to the dust along the bottom of the doorframe, scattered, uneven. Footprint, size 10, treads reversed. Not mine, not yours. Jake bent down, his cop instincts finally catching up with whatever this was. "Could be maintenance. No one's authorized past the second sub-level. No logs, no reports." Inside the storage room was nothing but empty racks and a broken-down HVAC system that hadn't worked in years. But in the far corner, Jake saw it. A panel that didn't match the wall. Sleek, new, no label. "Rafe." "Yeah," Ray said quietly, already halfway across the room. Ray knelt and tapped the panel. It gave slightly, magnetic maybe. He didn't pry it open. He didn't have to. He just looked at Jake. "Whatever's going on here isn't just about building maintenance or forgotten rooms," Ray said, standing up. "Someone's running something from inside." Jake wanted to ask how Ray knew, but the truth was, he believed him, because Ray didn't guess. He knew. Fine, on Monday, things escalated. A clerk named Dana Reyes, who worked in the payroll department, was found crying in the stairwell between floors 2 and 3. Jake happened to be nearby. When he asked what happened, she stammered out a jumbled story about someone following her to her car the night before. She couldn't see a face. No badge, just the feeling of being watched. Then, this morning, she found a note in her mailbox. One of those old-style inter-office mail slots. It wasn't signed, just typed words on a slip of paper. "Keep quiet. Some things are above your pay grade." Jake brought the note to Boone. Boone shrugged, probably some jerk playing office politics. But when Jake told Ray, the old man's jaw tightened. "I need to see her mailbox," Ray said. They checked it after hours. Ray looked at the mail slot, then the hinges on the wall mount panel, ran his fingers along the inside edge. Then he turned and walked away without saying a word. But Ray didn't stop. He muttered only one thing as he walked back toward the elevator. To Crane. The next morning, Ray wasn't in his usual hallway. Jake waited. Checked the schedule. No janitor on file. Ray wasn't on the books that day. He called the main custodial office. No one answered. Finally, he called Boone. "Have you seen Ray?" Boone hesitated. "Not since yesterday." "Why?" Jake felt it in his gut. Something was off. By noon, Jake was reviewing security footage again. It was hard to explain why. Just instinct. He pulled all logs for the previous night. Midnight to 4 a.m. Most feeds were empty. Except one. West stairwell sublevel B. At 2:14 a.m., there was movement. A figure entered from the mechanical hallway, tall, wearing a dark hoodie, and carrying what looked like a small equipment bag. The camera flickered again, just like before, but this time Jake saw enough. The person stopped outside utility storage 3F. Then the figure crouched, reached for the magnetic panel, and disappeared. The next 5 minutes of footage? Gone. Corrupted. The system labeled it. Data stream error 93A, manual interruption suspected. Jake stood from his desk, eyes wide, heart pounding. He called Boone again. "Where's Captain Reyes?" Boone paused. "She's out sick." "Why?" Jake didn't answer. He was already grabbing his badge and heading for the elevator. When he reached the lower level, Ray was there. But he wasn't cleaning. He was standing in the corner, just outside utility 3F, arms folded, waiting. Jake stopped cold. "You knew I'd come down here." Ray nodded. "I saw the footage. Someone's messing with the system. Why haven't you told anyone?" Ray looked at him, tired but sharp. "Because telling the wrong people gets people hurt." Jake swallowed. "Then who do we tell?" Ray reached into his coat and pulled out a small black notebook. No markings, just worn leather and years of use. He handed it to Jake. Inside were pages of notes. Names, dates, incidents, cross-referenced entries, security shifts, maintenance rotations, broken cameras, people who'd left unexpectedly. "How long have you been keeping this?" Jake asked. Ray's eyes were distant. "Since before you were in uniform?" Jake flipped a few more pages. Some names were circled, others crossed out. The last page had one single line. "It starts in the silence, that's where they hide." Jake looked up, mouth dry. "What exactly is going on here, Ray?" Ray turned, his silhouette framed by the faint red light of the stairwell behind him. "That's what we're about to find out." And for the first time, Jake realized this wasn't just about a janitor with a past. This was about a war being waged in whispers. And something told him the fight was far from over. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. He kept it tucked inside the inner pocket of his uniform, close to his chest like it was a heartbeat not his own. Every few hours, when no one was looking, he pulled it out, just to run his thumb over the worn leather, as if doing so might help him absorb what was inside. There were names he recognized, some he didn't, but the most unsettling thing was how complete it was. Like Ray had been watching, listening, recording every shift in the air for years, while no one else even noticed the room had changed. And now Jake saw it too, not clearly, but enough to know that something larger than him was moving in the dark. A game was being played. Quietly, strategically. And Ray? He'd been keeping score. Jake returned to the basement 2 nights later, after hours, flashlight in hand. He waited by the old utility corridor until the rest of the staff had gone home. No janitors, no clerks, no footsteps. Just the hum of forgotten machinery and the occasional metallic groan of age-old pipes settling into the night. Ray was late. Jake had never seen Ray late. But at 10:43 p.m. the stairwell door creaked open, and the old man emerged like a shadow peeled off the wall. He wasn't in uniform. Instead, he wore a weathered army jacket zipped to the collar and carried a small duffel bag with frayed nylon straps. "You brought it?" Ray asked. Jake nodded and handed him the notebook. Ray flipped it open to the marked page he'd written days earlier. Utility Storage 3F. And beneath it, a new entry had been added in bold block letters. Sequence Alpha. Redundant triggers. Sensitive data. Pre-deployment. Jake stared. "This is military code." Ray didn't look up. Black Ops terminology. You wouldn't find it in a normal briefing, but if you were stationed where I was, you learned to read the silences between words. Jake felt a chill crawl down his back. "What is this place, Ray?" Ray zipped the notebook back into his jacket. Once upon a time, this city was involved in several federal pilot programs. Homeland Security, cyber defense, surveillance infrastructure. They used buildings like this, ones with access, low visibility, and existing municipal budgets, as hidden test grounds. What? Ray looked at the ceiling. For control. Jake followed his gaze, unsure if he meant something literal or something else entirely. "You're saying this building, our building, is wired for surveillance?" Ray walked forward, stopped beside a breaker box, and tapped the wall next to it. The metal clinked unnaturally. "Bid panel you saw in the footage isn't new. It's reactivated." "Reactivated by who?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Jake crossed his arms. "You think it's internal?" Ray turned slowly. "Let me ask you something. You ever notice how often the elevator breaks down?" Jake blinked. "Every week, it seems." "Always around the same time?" "Thursday nights. Security sweep schedules get altered last minute." Jake nodded. Ray continued. "Then 2 clerks get reassigned, one quits without warning, and the camera logs start blinking out during specific windows." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "You think someone's using the building for something off books?" Ray didn't answer right away. He reached into his duffel and pulled out a thin metal tool. It looked like a lockpick, but longer, with a slight curve. "What's that?" "Access hook. Modified it myself. Old trick from Baghdad. We use these to bypass signal covers inside power stations." Ray approached the magnetic panel in storage 3F. He slid the tool into the side, probed gently, then pulled upward with a soft click. The panel loosened. A small recess was revealed, lined with dust except for a rectangular black device fixed to the inside with adhesive brackets. It had no labels, no serials, just a single red diode blinking faintly in the dark. Jake leaned closer. "What is that?" Ray's voice was low. "Data relay. Encrypts and transmits packets to an unknown external server, likely on a timer loop. Someone's either collecting from inside or they're staging something." Jake felt his stomach turn. "Is this even legal?" Ray gave a bitter chuckle. "Legal? Jake, I ran missions in countries that didn't exist on maps. Legal doesn't mean much when no one's watching." Jake reached for his radio, but Ray stopped him with a hand on the shoulder. "No transmissions, not from here." Jake hesitated, then lowered the radio. Ray pulled a small cloth pouch from his coat, unwrapped it to reveal a pocket-sized signal disruptor. He flicked a switch. The device began emitting a low, nearly inaudible hum. "I picked this up from an old contact. Short range, keeps things quiet while we work." "Work on what?" Jake asked. Ray looked at him, eyes steady. "Getting to the center." The next 30 minutes passed in heavy silence as the two men worked in tandem. Ray exposed 2 more panels, one hidden behind an HVAC duct, another beneath a fuse box, and each held a device just like the first, each one silently blinking, waiting, invisible to everyone who didn't know to look. Jake's mind raced with questions, but he knew better than to interrupt Ray while he worked. When the last panel was opened, Ray sat back against the concrete wall, breathing heavier than usual. Jake handed him a bottle of water. "You all right?" Ray nodded. "Just getting old." "You think these are transmitting?" "Not yet, but soon." Jake furrowed his brow. "Then we need to alert someone. The feds, Homeland?" Ray shook his head. "No, not yet." Ray leaned in close, his voice nearly a whisper. "Because there's something worse than data theft, Jake. It's trust erosion. The moment we call it in, they'll sanitize the whole place. Evidence gone. We'll be labeled paranoid or discredited, and whoever's behind this, they walk free." Jake clenched his jaw. "So, what do we do?" Ray slowly stood, dusted off his coat, and looked up toward the stairwell. "We go higher." "Meaning?" "There's a man I served with, Marcus Hill, retired colonel. He's got clearance that doesn't expire. I haven't called him in 10 years. But if anyone can verify this, it's him." Jake followed Ray back to the surface, heart pounding with adrenaline and doubt. The old man was speaking with the certainty of someone who had played chess in a minefield. Someone who had buried men and secrets both. As they stepped into the night air outside the building, Jake looked up at the office windows above, their reflections gleaming in the dark like the eyes of something ancient, watching. Ray turned his face to the wind, closed his eyes for a moment. "I used to think wars ended when you got home," he murmured. "Now I know some of them just change clothes." Jake didn't reply. He couldn't, because something had started. And whatever it wasn't over yet. Colonel Marcus Hill looked exactly the way Jake imagined a retired Special Operations commander would, straight back despite his age, voice low and full of gravity, like every word he spoke had been cleared for public release after years of classification. They met in an out-of-the-way diner on the edge of the city, the kind that hadn't changed its menu since the early 1980 CS. Ray had chosen the place. Said it was off the grid. No surveillance cameras, no curious foot traffic. Just coffee that tasted like burnt earth and waitresses who knew when to leave you alone. Jake sat across from Hill, trying not to let his nerves show. Ray sat next to him, quiet but watchful, his old army jacket zipped halfway, the same notebook lying flat on the table between them. He hadn't touched it since they arrived. He didn't have to. The weight of its contents hovered in the air like static. Colonel Hill didn't bother with pleasantries. "You say you found 3 embedded data nodes in a municipal building," he said, folding his hands in front of him. "Unmarked, unregistered, broadcasting-capable hardware?" "Yes, sir," Jake replied, his voice tight. Hill turned to Ray. "And you waited this long to bring it to me?" Ray didn't blink. "You know why. Too many unknowns, too many ghosts still walking." Hill grunted. "Fair." He leaned back in the booth, eyes narrowing. "I did a sweep on the building records. There's no documentation of any surveillance retrofit, no military involvement on paper. But I did find something buried under a redirected procurement code. Project name, Cobalt Orchard." Ray's jaw set. Jake leaned forward. "What is that?" Hill looked at him. "It was supposed to be a contingency framework. Post 9/11 response infrastructure. They embedded tech nodes in civilian sites, courthouses, utility hubs, data centers. Supposedly inactive, just dormant surveillance potential, but some of us always believed that a few of them were activated off books. "Wait?" Jake asked. Hill didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he said, "To monitor internal threats, political actors, whistleblowers, the kind of people who ask the wrong questions in the right places." Jake's skin prickled. "You're saying someone's using this building to spy on government employees?" "I'm saying," Hill replied, "that someone resurrected a buried black project, and now you've poked it." Ray didn't flinch. "We need names." Hill nodded slowly. "There are no names, not real ones, but there are code identifiers tied to the procurement documents, operatives who signed the original tech integration orders. One of them still active in the private sector, goes by the alias K. Dalton. Real name never showed up, but I know where he operates now." Jake listened, heart racing. "Private security firm out of Virginia," Hill continued. "They've got contracts with everyone from DHS to private telecom companies. If Dalton's involved, it means this isn't just some leftover project. It's operational, active, and dangerous." Ray leaned forward. "We need access." Hill slid a USB drive across the table. "Encrypted files, last known locations, contractor logs, signal routing points. Don't ask how I got it." Jake picked it up, weighed it in his palm. It was smaller than a car key, but it felt heavier than a weapon. Gratefully, some folks who are personally affected by depression have said that going on a daily walk, stopping at noon helps, getting a glass of water, trying to get calm. Ray met Hill's eyes. "We make sure it doesn't." Hill gave a quiet nod. "You've got a window, maybe 48 hours max. After that, you go dark. If they know you're looking, they'll come looking back." The colonel stood, pulled his coat tight. Before walking out, he turned to Ray. "You sure about this?" Ray looked at him, expression unreadable. "I was trained for this. I didn't forget how." Hill didn't smile. "No, you never did." He walked out without another word. Jake sat in silence, still staring at the USB drive. Ray sipped his coffee. "What now?" Jake asked finally. Ray looked at the window, as if calculating something invisible. "Now," he said, "we go back to the building." They returned just after midnight. The city lay quiet, wrapped in a blanket of early spring fog. Ray moved like he belonged in the shadows, each step measured, every door opened with a quiet touch of certainty. Jake followed, adrenaline pumping, eyes sharp. They descended to the lower levels, the sub-basement where the air tasted like copper and secrets. Ray disabled the motion detectors with a trick that looked more instinct than skill, like his hands remembered what the world tried to make him forget. In the heart of the mechanical level, they found the fourth panel. This one was different. It was embedded in a wall behind a sealed vent, hidden beneath insulation that had to be cut away. Ray worked in silence, Jake watching his every move. When the panel popped free, it revealed not one, but two devices, stacked vertically, blinking in slow, synchronized rhythm. Ray stepped back, frowning. "That's not just a relay. That's a repeater." "A repeater for what?" "Multiple transmissions, parallel output. Someone's copying the data stream to a second recipient." Jake's voice dropped. "Which means?" Ray met his gaze. "They're working with someone else. Jake felt the floor shift under his feet, not literally, but mentally. The scale of what they were facing was expanding faster than he could process. Ray reached into his coat, pulled out a handheld signal reader, and scanned the device. A sharp beep echoed in the corridor. Ray studied the screen. Jake waited. Then Ray said something that made Jake's stomach turn. "It's live right now." Jake instinctively reached for his radio. Ray stopped him again. "Don't. If it's transmitting, they'll know we're close." "Well, what do we do?" Ray crouched, pulled a cable cutter from his bag, and looked up. "We cut the cord." The device sparked faintly as the cord was severed. One diode turned red. The blinking stopped. Silence fell over the corridor. Jake exhaled slowly. But just as they turned to leave, the hallway lights flickered. Then again, a third time. Ray's posture changed instantly. Rigid, alert, every muscle ready. "Movement," he whispered. Jake drew his weapon. From the far end of the hall, the low groan of metal echoed toward them. The mechanical door at the corridor's end opened slowly. A figure stepped through, tall, hooded, unarmed, but deliberate. Ray stepped forward. "Don't." The figure froze. Then a voice, distorted by some kind of voice modifier, crackled from beneath the hood. "You shouldn't have come back, Sergeant Smith." Jake's heart dropped. Ray didn't blink. "You've been watching. We've been managing," the voice replied, "until you decided to become history again." Jake raised his weapon. "Who are you?" The figure ignored him. "You don't understand what you've interrupted. This isn't about surveillance. This is about control. Quiet, safe, necessary." Ray's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You buried our names. Now we bury yours." The figure took one step forward. Ray was faster. He lunged, closed the distance, and swept the figure to the ground with a move too fast for Jake to follow. The hood flew back. Jake saw a face. Clean-shaven, pale, mid-40s, not military. The man on the ground grinned even as Ray pinned him. "You think you've won?" Ray leaned in, whispering something Jake couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it made the man's smile disappear. Ray stood. Jake cuffed the man. They left the basement with the man secured between them and the USB drive sealed in Jake's vest. Back at the precinct, Captain Reyes waited. When Jake handed over the report, she didn't ask questions. She just looked at Ray, then at Jake. "You two just stepped into a storm." Ray nodded. "Then it's about time someone held the umbrella." And in that moment, Jake finally understood. Ray Smith wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Waiting for the right time to make the truth louder than the silence that buried it. Ray stood on the courthouse steps, dressed in his faded Navy uniform shirt and plain slacks. A man who looked more like someone waiting for a bus than someone who had just helped dismantle a shadow operation embedded in the very fabric of local government. The morning was crisp, the kind of morning that made you breathe a little deeper without realizing it. Flags fluttered above the building, city and country alike, and for the first time in a long time Ray allowed himself to stop scanning for shadows. He had been summoned, not ordered, but invited, to testify at a closed-door inquiry into what the city called a serious breach of protocol. The media, now sniffing out the story from fragments and leaks, had already begun to form its own narrative: rogue surveillance, unauthorized data collection, contractors operating beyond their mandate. But what no one could quite explain yet, at least not publicly, was how a janitor had uncovered it all. Jake stood beside him, in full uniform, posture tight but proud. He hadn't slept much, not since the arrest 2 nights ago. Captain Reyes had taken care of the paperwork, ensured the incident reports were handled with discretion, and then told Jake bluntly, "You're not just writing a report, you're writing history. Don't screw it up." Ray hadn't asked for recognition. He hadn't demanded any kind of apology. All he'd asked for was 10 minutes alone with the city's oversight committee in a private chamber without press or recordings. They'd agreed. And when he spoke, he did so with precision, like a man who'd been waiting to be heard for decades, but never forgot how to keep his voice calm. He didn't name names that didn't need naming. He didn't point fingers or grandstand. He simply laid out the facts. He said, some systems were never meant to be turned on. He said, the people trusted this building, this city. You owe them more than blind eyes. He said, the truth doesn't come with clearance levels. And when he left the chamber, the people inside stood in silence. Outside, Jake watched him emerge and didn't say a word. Ray just nodded, like something inside him had finally loosened. As they turned to leave, a voice called out across the courtyard. Sergeant Smith. Ray stopped. Slowly turned. From across the pavement, Officer Mitchell, the young cop from that first morning, now standing in front of his patrol unit, stepped with formality, stepped forward. He didn't speak at first, just approached, eyes unsure. Then he raised his right hand and saluted. Ray's face didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. He stepped closer, looked the young man in the eye, then returned the salute. Not out of pride, not out of formality, but out of something deeper. Mutual recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with what was earned in silence. Jake watched the moment and realized how far they'd come. From a hallway confrontation to this. From suspicion to trust. And somewhere along the way a bridge had formed between generations, between duty and memory, between what had been forgotten and what was now undeniable. Later that afternoon, the city issued a statement. They called Ray a critical whistleblower. They acknowledged that elements of previously inactive federal infrastructure had been misused without proper oversight. They vowed reforms, investigations, transparency. Ray didn't listen to the press conference. He was back at the municipal building, quietly rolling his mop bucket through the hallway, as if nothing had changed. Because for Ray, everything had, and yet nothing had. Jake found him near the west stairwell, wiping down a railing with that same quiet, methodical touch. You know, Jake said, you could retire now. Walk away. They'd name a wing after you. Ray smiled faintly. That'd be a waste of a perfectly good hallway. Jake chuckled. Seriously, I think they want to give you some kind of medal, ceremony and everything. I've had medals, Ray said. They looked nice in a drawer. Jake leaned against the wall. Then what now? Ray wrung out the cloth and set it aside. Now I finish my shift. Same as always. Jake stared at him. You really don't want any of it, do you? The attention? Ray looked up. You know what attention got me overseas? A bigger target on my back. Jake nodded quietly. You going to keep the notebook? Ray paused. No. He reached into his back pocket, pulled it out, and handed it to Jake. It's yours now. Jake took it, surprised. Are you sure? Ray gave a slow nod. I wrote the past. You write what happens next. Jake turned the notebook over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, not just the paper, but the responsibility. The unspoken oath passed from one man to another. Thank you, Jake said. Ray just smiled. Be better than me. I don't think that's possible. Then be louder. That night, a small ceremony was held. Not official, not televised. Just a gathering in the municipal building lobby. A few officers, some staff, Captain Reyes, a few of the clerks who had worked with Ray for years but never knew what he carried. No speeches, no podium. Just Captain Reyes standing beside Ray, holding a simple plaque. It read, Raymond Ray Smith, United States Army Custodian, Protector, Witness. In silence he saw. In service he acted. This building stands taller because of him. Ernie didn't cry, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the plaque just a little too long. After the crowd dispersed, Jake helped him carry it to the janitor's closet. "You going to hang it in here?" Jake asked. Ray shook his head. Too many reflections. He placed it gently in the corner, next to the mop sink. Then he turned to Jake and said, "Tomorrow, we walk the building again, first thing." Jake smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." And when he left the building that night, he looked back, one last time. The lights still glowed. The windows still shimmered. But something about the place felt different. Like truth had walked its halls again and left its mark.